There was also evidence of bruises on the face, chest, ankle, and back of the body.
He was beaten from the 3rd day to the 7th day of his capture. Report states the Iraqi forces beat him with cables and water pipes.
Large amounts of blood on the cell floor, a wire used for electric shock, and a rubber hose.
The detainee's body showed extensive bruising around the shoulders, arms, and lower extremities.
Pussy on the forehead of a prisoner who was crying.
Detainee's back shows what appears to be a boot print, outlined in bruised tissue.
Reasonable suspicion of abuse. Outcome, no further investigation.
Finally, the evidence. For years, the Iraqi people have been insisting that the American military were turning a blind eye and ignoring widespread and systematic torture by the Iraqi security forces on their own people. The proof that this torture was being ignored comes from the US military's own leaked records.
We got hold of this enormous database, 400,000 documents. This is a gigantic quantity of material. And we found that there were cases of detainee abuse, as they called them. And when we looked them up, this mysterious phrase kept coming up, Frago 242. We discovered that Frago 242 was an order. It's called a fragmentary order in military jargon, which means a sort of short version of something. And what it said was, when they discovered Iraqis torturing or maltreating other Iraqis, no investigation was necessary.
3 Iraqi police lieutenants tortured him by pouring chemicals on his hands, cut his fingers off.
The detainees stated that during questioning they were beaten, threatened, and forced into saying they were insurgents. No further investigation.
What you see here is a specific order coming from a high level of the US military saying, in effect, we know this goes on. When it goes on, turn a blind eye.
Iraqi on Iraqi detainee abuse summary. Note, per Multinational Corp Iraq Frago 242, only an initial report will be made for apparent law of armed conflict violations. No further investigation will be required unless directed by HHQ.
These are the kind of things that in other contexts would be described as war crimes. What they're reminiscent of, when you read through them, is not so much conventional counterinsurgencies as the horrible, murderous regime of Saddam Hussein.
These revelations don't surprise me at all because they're just documentation of what I saw in 2005, which was Iraqi soldiers torturing, beating, threatening to execute their prisoners, and American soldiers and American advisors standing aside and doing nothing.
Peter Maas was a journalist working for the New York Times. He witnessed this policy with his own eyes when he was given unique and rare access to the elite Ministry of Interior's Special Commandos, the Wolf Brigade. For much of his time in Samarra, he was under the supervision of this man, James Steele, General Petraeus' special advisor. A counterinsurgency expert with experience going back to El Salvador, James Steele has been highly decorated throughout his career and has even been awarded the Purple Heart.
Petraeus told me that Steele was his man. Steele had entree to everything. One day, Jim Steele said to me, hey, they just captured a Saudi jihadi. Would you like to interview him?
Peter Maas accepted the invitation to go to the interrogation centre.
And we kind of walk into the entrance area, and the first thing that I see is one of the Iraqi guards beating up one of the Iraqi prisoners. And then I'm taken not into the main area, kind of the main hall, although out of the corner of my eye I could see there were a lot of prisoners in there with their hands tied behind their backs. I was taken to a side office where the Saudi was brought in, and there was actually blood dripping down the side of a desk in this office. And while this interview was going on, me and the Saudi with Jim Steele also in the room, there were these terrible screams. There was somebody shouting, Allah, 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 but it wasn't, kind of religious ecstasy or something like that. These were screams of pain and terror. And they were so loud and they were so disturbing that Steele left the room to go find out, what was going on because it was breaking up our interview. And while he was gone, the screaming stopped. And then he came back into the room and the interview continued.
James Steele has always maintained that he is opposed to human rights abuses and believes torture to be counterproductive. When the Iraqi Ministry of the Interior were asked about torture in Samarra, they said in their statement that they do not allow any human rights abuses of prisoners. We have asked Mr. Steele to comment on the new revelations in the military logs and on Peter Mass's account of what happened that day in the interrogation centre. We are awaiting his reply.
Well, now we've got this database, we can actually check and see whether there was any reporting at the time of what was going on in Samarra. And yes, here there are several hundred entries in that time period. A lot of them I see for Samarra and detainee. The detainees will be questioned further by the 2nd MOI Commando Battalion. Well, I think when they say that, what they mean is they're being turned over to the Commando Battalion for interrogation. Over and over again, there are literally dozens of entries for this Ministry of the Interior Battalion, taking detainees, taking them off to be interrogated, to be further questioned, and then silence. And it doesn't say, oh, but they're being abused or anything, and these are sort of tantalizing hints about what's going on in another room that the Americans writing this don't want to hear anything about. That's the picture that's coming across.
The clear priority at that time in Iraq was to not have this incredibly shaky provisional government defeated by the insurgency. That was priority number one, to which every other priority, democracy, human rights, etc., was subordinate.